Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest wants to remain anonymous, so we're just going to call her Mary. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Mary, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm from New York State, and I pretty much lived here from the time I was, let's say, 5 on. And I teach on different areas of science, and I believe in what's called creative design, so I have a very strong spiritual side, but I also have a very strong science side. And the two manage to live in harmony inside of me and in my life and my activities.
Yeah, those two aren't good bedfellows. I'm surprised they can get along so well inside your head, but you're not the only person who feels that way. A lot of people do.
That's good to know. I'm not the only one, and that, it's kind of lonely sometimes. If I'm with the spiritual people, it's kind of lonely because they don't want to talk science, and then if I'm with the science people, many times they don't want to go into the discussion of spirituality, so it can be lonely.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet it can be. When did you first hear the term Dogman?
It was possibly 4 years ago when I was watching, I believe it's Monsters and Mysteries in America. One of those shows on cryptids. And before that, I had never, ever heard of Dogman.
That was a really good show. It sure is a shame they don't air new episodes anymore.
I know the older I get and the more I look into cryptids, the more I see that around the world there are quite a few. So they would have, I would think, a lot of information there to work with to make more shows. But they choose not to.
Yeah, it is pretty frustrating. Your encounter happened in a place where most people who know about Dogmen would never expect. Please tell us about that place.
Well, it's a small city in central New York. It's considered the Utica Rome area, and it was in the city proper. And the last place I guess you would expect to see this type of thing, at least I know for me it was the last place I would expect to see something like this, and I wasn't expecting to see it. And if I could go back in time and unsee it, I would, but I can't do that. And still to this day, I toss it around in my head. What was that? Am I positive it wasn't a dog? Am I positive of the things that made it different from a dog? Am I positive of the size? Am I positive that it was standing on 2 legs, that it was definitely bipedal, and that it was doing things that a dog could not do? So that's the where, and that was my thinking when I saw it there.
Well, it's not a comfortable thought, but you saw what you saw, and that's all there is to it.
Yes, unfortunately, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, like you said, unfortunately. How close is Utica to New York City?
A lot's going to depend upon who's doing the driving. If I drive 4 hours, but I know other people, if they drive, it's close to 5, sometimes 6. But I don't like sitting in the car for that length of time, so I can make it in 4.
So it is a pretty good distance away. How urban was this area where you had your encounter?
Well, back then, and I think it still is, it was considered the 4th largest city in New York State, the 4th or the 5th. So it had a downtown. It was bigger than most cities, but nowhere near a New York City, or even close to what we call Buffalo, New York. And it was pretty rural in like the Rome part, I believe. I didn't go to Rome that often, other than maybe a few times to the Air Force base that used to be there. We did have an Air Force base there, and sometimes we would go because certain members of the family had military connections and background. So, it was a nice trip there and a nice trip back. So when you consider the Utica Rome area proper, Utica was more urban, I think, than Rome. And I think it still is. So it used to be Fort Stanwix or Fort Schuyler back during the Revolutionary War.
It's got some history then.
Oh, it has a good amount of history, yes.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. Yeah, back then when you had that encounter, it wasn't like it was built all up all over like some huge city, but it still wasn't the kind of place where you'd ever expect to have a Dogman encounter.
No, it wasn't. As I said, it was in a residential neighborhood in the city, and I can't tell you that there were any close woodland areas. And of course, I didn't know what a Dogman was back then. I never heard of it. It was only 4 years ago that I had heard of a Dogman. So if you had asked me then what I thought it was, it would be different maybe than what I think it is now. And if you said, where could it live, I would have probably told you, well, I think it's maybe one of the people who live there. So now it's a little different for me.
Now you do have access to a lot more information than you had back then, so that's understandable.
Yes, I've grown in my knowledge of the subject, but it was scary then, and it's still a scary thing to think about now. And for many years, I tried not to think about it.
Yeah, it's not the most comfortable experience you've had to think about, so that's no surprise. When we spoke for the first time, you asked me if Dogmen have been seen near New York City. When I told you that they have, what did you think?
It was shocking because I go to New York City quite often. And New York City, it's one of the world famous cities, and people from everywhere are there. And, I could say, okay, if you say to me that there are people there from Timbuktu or Kathmandu, I would say, okay, yeah, I believe that. But if you told me one of these creatures was there, I would be like, oh my God, what? That's mind-blowing for me. And most of the places where I go, it is that wooded area in the Bronx and Central Park, at the Botanical Garden and that. So it just does not make me feel great about it. You have to step lively, I think, when you're in New York and be on your toes because of the people. Many kind people there, but there are also many people who, they're not kind. And then to think that there's this other element that you need to be aware of. Goodness, no. That's why that took me back, because I was like, oh gosh, there's more to think about than just your typical really large crowded city and the people. So that's why I'm still almost speechless when I think of that.
Oh, I bet you are. Yeah, of all the places you would expect to find Dogmen, New York City, you just wouldn't expect that. And from what I hear, they've actually been seen in Central Park. Can you imagine going for a late night stroll through the park? And of course, you're going to be worried about muggers, but you run into a Dogman.
Yeah, that's just another element that just makes you shudder. It makes me shudder, at least. Some people might relish the thought of seeing a Dogman, but what I saw that I now know is a Dogman, I don't relish seeing it again.
Oh, I'm sure you don't. All right, Mary, let's talk about this encounter you had. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. Well, it's not easy to recount it because I was alone, and I was 17, and we're talking close to 40 years ago, I'm going to say. Anywhere between 35 and 40 years ago. And I know I should know exactly when it was, because I could do the math. I know how old I was when I saw it. But it was a long time ago. And I was a teenager, and it was the month of February, and I was coming home from school, and as I told you back then, we walked. I was not bused to any place. We walked. And if we were lucky on a real cold day, we might get a ride, but, the temperatures had to be very, very cold, sub-zero. But we just bundled up and we walked to school and we walked home. And I was coming home and I had decided to go and stop by the library. And then instead of going back and going down the street that I usually would go down, I decided to take a shortcut through a neighborhood that I normally don't go through. I had gone through this neighborhood years before that. I had taken my siblings to the library, and we came back that way, and, my siblings were very young. They were preschool age, and as we were coming back, there was an elderly woman with a very thick, I want to say, Slavic accent, and I remember she was fanning herself on the porch because it was summer, and she stood up and she leaned over the rail because the porches were high up on that street. So like the sidewalk was maybe 3 feet below the porch. And she stood up and she looked over with a very big smile on her face. And I remember she said to me, "Oh, those are beautiful babies." She was saying it with broken English because she had the accent. And I said, "Thank you." And she said, "Are those your siblings or are they your children?" And I said, "They're my siblings." And she said, "Oh," she goes, "I thought so because you look too young to be a mother." And so, we said bye to her and we went home. So that was probably the only time that I had really gone down that street. And then, fast forward about, let me see, I must have been maybe 14 at the time. And so fast forward to age 17, and I'm coming down that street in the winter, in February, and I'm walking alone, and it's a hill, like you go down a hill from where the library goes, and the street, it's pretty steep. And I remember I was trying not to slip because, there was a good amount of snow and ice on the ground. And as I walked on, I started hearing what sounded like something going through the garbage cans. And the garbage cans then were those metal or plastic cans. They didn't have the recycle bins that we have now, and the plastic ones that you roll. At least where I am, that's what we have. These were those old Rubbermaid and those old metal trash cans with the lid that you pick up and you put the garbage in and then you put the lid down and it clanks and that. And it was garbage day, so there were garbage cans out in front of the homes. And as I was walking, I heard it, and, I was getting a little, I don't know, it sort of made me wonder, well, what's going on over there, in front of me down the street with the garbages, because it was really loud. It wasn't, normally like someone would just be putting garbage in. It was really slamming and tussling. I could hear garbage bags rattling, the cans in them rattling and things like that. So I started slowing down, I remember, and there were snowbanks. So, I couldn't see too far ahead because there was a street that ran perpendicular to the one that I was coming down. And the snow had been piled up so that it was a snowbank, and, they pretty much ran down the street because back then we tend to get a lot of snowfall, and so I couldn't see over it, and I'm about 5'8", and so the snowbank had to have been, taller than 6 feet. So as I'm walking, I'm slowing, and I'm kind of like, oh, who is that going through the garbage cans like that? I'm thinking maybe it's, some homeless person or something. And I was nervous because I was like, I really don't want someone asking me for money as I go by or, asking me if I had anything to eat. And because it was just me, and it seemed like no one was on the street. For some reason, the street just had a dark feeling to it. So I was nervous already before I saw what I saw. So I get closer to the corner and I see this dark, tall thing. It was like, how can I put it? I couldn't quite see the entire figure because the snowbank, as I said, was blocking it. But I could see it moving kind of back and forth. And, it was black. It was black. And I was like, oh, is that a dog? That's not a person, I hope. Is that a dog? And I'm thinking this to myself. Now imagine a 17-year-old trying to figure out, what's going on ahead of them. You're not quite a child, but you're also not an adult. So at that point, I just felt really afraid. And I can honestly say, I believe the hair was standing up on the back of my neck because of this black thing that I saw. And I could see that it was fur. So I was really walking slowly by that point, and I was trying to look around the snowbank. And I got to a certain point where I was maybe 20 feet away. And now, mind you, I would have had to cross the street. And if I had crossed the street, that probably would have brought me I would say maybe 10, 12 feet. Well, it would have been like a 10 to 12 feet cross. And then that would have made it so that I was maybe 8 feet away from this thing. So by the time I got to that 20 feet mark, I could see around the snowbank. And oh my gosh, I was like, oh, that is a huge dog. I was terrified. I'm not afraid of dogs. I love animals. But this thing I was afraid of. But then I was like, wait a minute. It's standing on two legs. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's got fingers, not paws. The feet looked like a Limburger's feet, and the legs were, they were the typical canine legs with the joints and the tail. It had a long, bushy tail, and it wasn't having any problems standing up on that ice and going through the garbage cans, and it was ripping the bags open, and it was looking for something that was in the garbage. I mean, it was focused on that. It reminded me of when they have the sales at the store and they have like the bins, and usually, and I don't want to sound sexist, but usually the women are the ones digging in the bins looking for something. That's how it was going through the garbage. And I could not believe the hands. They weren't paws, they were fingers. And the shivers are going up my spine now just remembering how well it used its hands to pull the things out of the garbage bag. And whatever it was that it was looking for, it was intent on finding it. And I just couldn't believe this thing. It was tall. It was bent over going through the garbage. So if the snowbank was 6 feet and, I could see at least the hump in its back a little over the snowbank, imagine how tall it had to have been. And I remember all of a sudden it's like hearing this little voice say, go left down this street, don't cross over, walk quickly, and just keep going. And so, I detoured. I had to go all the way back almost to where I had come from at my school. And I just remember praying and saying, oh, God, please don't let this thing see me. Please don't let it look up. Don't let it, please. I was trying not to slip on the ice, and it just felt like it took forever to get so that I could not see this thing anymore. My eyes did not leave it because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to walk as fast as I can. I'm not going to run because I don't want to slip, and I've got to try not to let it hear me. And I was just like, God, you got to help me to do this. And it was the longest few, and I know it had to have been seconds, but it was the longest few seconds ever, I believe. I don't think I've ever experienced something that felt that long before. And I went down the street. I went left, and I came finally to the street that I would normally go down to get home, and I quickly went down that street, and then I went home. I went home, and that was my run-in with this creature, and all these years, it has made me say, what was that? Did I really see what I saw? Was it really a dog? And I was just so afraid that, I saw it larger than it really was. Was I so afraid that I saw hands when it didn't really have hands? I can't tell you anything other than, by the time I got home, I went in my bedroom and I closed the door, and I remember because it was a Friday and I did not come back out of my room probably until Sunday. I mean, I would come out, get a drink or get something to eat. I didn't speak to anyone, and I think that changed me to the point of where I became even more of an introvert, and definitely I became more prayerful. And I think I don't know, I hate to say it, but I think I grew up by several years that day, because I was no longer the same. So that was my encounter.
I wouldn't be surprised if you matured by several years because of that experience. I also wouldn't be surprised if you lost a few years off your life because of that experience as well.
Well, I can tell you this. My heart was beating extremely fast, and it was saying to me, if this thing turns, because I assumed the way it was going through the garbage that it was hungry, but it said if this thing turns, I don't think I would have seen, I wouldn't be here now. And that's just my opinion. I can't prove that. I don't know enough about the behaviors of these creatures. I can only tell you that this is just my thinking, because it was going through that garbage looking for something desperately. It wanted something in there, and I assumed that it was hungry.
Yeah, sure sounds like it must have been. How would you describe that Dogman to someone who has never heard about Dogman in the first place?
Well, years later, like after that experience, I would tell people, I wouldn't tell them what I saw. I would just say, don't go in that area. And years later, when I did tell someone and I did tell them what I saw, all I could say was it wasn't the Lon Chaney kind of werewolf, but I said it was probably, I had a book when I was little, Little Red Riding Hood, and it had the wolf dressed in the grandmother's clothing, and it wasn't quite like that because that figure was more cartoonish, whereas this figure that I saw was more, I want to say, sleek and streamlined, but I would have said it looked like that picture, only, if I had to say which was better looking, the one I saw was more, like I said, it was better. It was scary, but it was better looking. It wasn't, cartoonish. And I would say just take the clothes off of that, and the way that it's walking around like they had in that book, that's what it reminded me of. So it was hard until I saw Monsters and Mysteries to really say what the thing was and to describe it, other than a dog-like creature that stood on two legs, and that had hands that, other than the fingers being long and the claws being long, they looked rather human. And I think that's probably why I didn't describe it to many people.
I can only imagine what kind of a toll that's taken on you, knowing that those things were out there for all these years. Not easy.
Well, I thought there was only one. I thought that was it. And I'm laughing. It's kind of a nervous laughter, though. But I did. I really thought that that was it. And, as time went on, I graduated. I went on to college in another place. And you can't forget, at least I could not forget it, but it wasn't at the forefront of my mind all of the time. And I do know that, I always had the feeling in my heart that I didn't want to see it again. Once was one too many times to see this creature.
Oh, it definitely is. Did you ever get a good look at its face?
No, it was more of a silhouette because the snowbank was there. So it was like, have you ever seen those silhouettes where they cut the silhouette of a person all in black and then they put it on a white background, like a white board? That's how it contrasted with the snowbank. And, because I was looking at it from the side, it was more the silhouette. I saw the snout. I saw the ears. I could see the muscles and things defined under the fur, and it was very furry, except for where the hands were. And I'm going to call them hands because I honestly can't call them paws. And it could have used them very quickly, those hands. So that's what I saw, the silhouette. I also couldn't see the eyes. And I was not of the mindset to stop and try and get a really, really good look at it, other than the really good look that I got. So I have to admit that I just, I wasn't going to examine it. And I was into science, but that was not the type of science that I really wanted to study at that point, and I still don't.
Yeah, trying to study something like that when you're that close to it, not a good idea. I'm glad you didn't.
No, that little voice, and I think I started having that, I don't know if it's, my gut or I don't know, but that's when I started having this, it was like a protection, because I had two other incidents where the voice told me what to do. One was a run-in with a bear, and then another was a run-in with a human, and it told me what to do, get out or do this. And so I credit that voice to saving me. And some people will say, well, that was your gut instinct. And, and it's like, well, whatever it was, on 3 occasions it's been correct, and it's saved me and possibly other people I was with. And that first incident, it really did help me to get away, because I don't know how I kept my legs from giving way underneath me, because that's just how afraid I was.
Well, I'm so glad you were able to keep it together.
Yes, so am I. I mean, I never was a screamer. And many times my husband, like, if something is happening, I'll be like, okay, do this, do that. And he'll be like, can you at least scream, or can you show more emotion? I've never been the type to scream. That's just the way that I am naturally. But I think that I could become afraid enough so that I couldn't move my legs or whatever. But I think after that point, part of what changed in me was the fact that I realized in a tense situation, you must keep your head, or it can turn bad quickly.
It sure can. Looking back on it now, do you wish you could have seen its face more clearly?
No. Oh, I'm so sorry to have to say it, but no, no. just absolutely no, I don't. I have to be honest and tell you that what I did see, that was enough, and it was too much. I really wish I just didn't see the creature at all. And being alone like that, you don't know how lonely you can feel until you're in a situation where, you're fearing that something might harm you or even kill you, and there's no one there. And when I say there was no one there, I didn't see anyone going down the street. It was unbelievably quiet, even for the city. I mean, usually, there are birds even in the city, at least there. And I don't even think I saw a bird. I was talking to a family member, and I was saying, if people were aware of this thing and they were in their homes or somewhere hiding or whatever, they had to see a school kid with their backpack coming towards this thing, not knowing that it was there. And how I wish someone had yelled out, stop, turn around, or whatever. I just hate to think that someone was aware and that they did see me, and no one tried to warn me.
If someone did know it was out there and they didn't warn you, shame on them. How did its head size compare to its body?
If I look at it from a science point of view, I would tell you that it was a magnificent specimen, albeit very, very frightening. Its head, other than the fact that it was bipedal, it was in proportion to its body, I would say. Other than the fact that it was bipedal and it had a dog's head, I would not say that the head did not match the body, because it did. It looked like it was in proportion. And the arms definitely were longer than, they were straighter than the back legs, because the back legs had the curve, and the haunches. So if it could straighten its legs out, they would have been longer to the eye. But because of that curve, they did have a shorter look to them. And then the arms, they did look longer in proportion than what the normal human's arms look to their body. So they were longer, and the fingers were longer. And it had a snout. I can't say I saw whiskers, but I did see the pointy ears with the tufted hair. And then it had like a mane that was around the neck area, and I forget the name of it, but it looked like a widow's hump, or the dowager hump, dowager bump. I've heard it called a few things, but it had that on the back and the mane. And if it wasn't so darn scary, it would be, a magnificent specimen. And it was tall. And I have seen Great Danes, when they see their master. I know of a Great Dane, and it was jet black. And whenever its master would come, it would stand on its hind legs, and then it would have its front paws on the master's shoulder so it could lick the master. And this thing had that height, but it wasn't a Great Dane. It wasn't a Great Dane. It wasn't a husky. It wasn't anything. It was not a normal canine. It just wasn't.
So from the way you described it, if it was standing next to a 6-foot-tall man, how would it compare?
Well, it had to have been, like I said, hunched over going through the garbage like that. It had to have been, it was about 6 feet. I mean, the snowbanks were piled up from when you clear the snow off the sidewalk, and, you throw it on the side. So it was high. So it had to be over 6 feet. I would think it had to, at the very least, been 7, between 6.5, 7 feet. That's what I'm guessing. Back then, we seemed to have a lot more snow. And I remember, like if we get 2 feet now, we'd say, oh, wow, that's a lot of snow. But I remember back then getting more than 2 feet, because, one of my chores was to help shovel. And, we'd be out there for a very long time shoveling, and the snowbanks would get high. The fun thing was you could go play on the snowbanks afterwards. But, they were very high. They were very high because, and I think of family members who were about 5'9", 5'11", and the snowbanks were taller than them. Once we piled the snow up, it was about 6 feet. So this creature was, I would estimate it to be about there, 6.5 to 7 feet. The haunches were rather thick, and the lower part of the leg was thinner, and the feet, they were not like the hands. like I said, they were more like a Leonberger. If you look up the dog Leonberger, to me that's the type of foot it had. Which, when I think about it now, I think those wider feet, I think of snowshoe rabbits and how they have the wide feet, that it probably could navigate snowy conditions very well without the sinking. It's a snowshoe principle. So it probably wouldn't have slipped the way that I thought it would, but it would have navigated that very well.
I'll bet that did leave quite the impression on you. Understandably so. How did that Dogman you saw compare to the Dogman in the logo on my website, dogmanencounters.com?
If you made it jet black, it could be probably the same creature. And actually, because I did share with my teenager what I saw, my teenager was always asking me, what does it look like? Can you describe it again? Can you describe it more? And when I saw that picture, I called my teenager in and I said, look, this is it. This is it. And that finally stopped my teenager from asking me to keep describing it, because I said, that's it. That is the creature.
When you saw that Dogman on my website, your jaw must have dropped.
I jumped back when I saw it. And I know I shivered. I jumped back and I shivered.
Sorry to do that to you, but I do want an accurate representation of what a Dogman can look like on that website. That is what a Dogman can look like, and that's why I wanted to represent it like that on the website there.
Not a problem. Not a problem, because even though I was shivering and like I said, I jumped back, it sort of made me say, okay, so you weren't imagining it. You weren't hallucinating. Which, I don't know why I would be hallucinating, but it just made me say, okay, I can accept that there is a creature like this out there. And so it brought that part to closure, at least.
Well, I'm glad it at least brought some form of closure to you. That's about the only good thing we can bring out of this.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say. When you first saw that Dogman, you thought it was a werewolf, but after a while you decided it probably wasn't a werewolf. Why's that?
Well, because, it was like about 4:30 in the afternoon, and in February it's still light out at 4:30. I don't know the cycles of the moon during that time, but everything you had heard about werewolves, well, from Hollywood, said it had to be a full moon, and the full moon usually is at night. So, after I had time to process it, I was like, that couldn't have been a werewolf because it was at nighttime. So that's what made me say, okay, it has to be something else. But it wasn't until, like I said, years later that I realized, that I saw the show and it said the Michigan Dogman. I was watching it with my teenager. I said, that looks sort of like something that I saw. And so the questions from my child started, and I started looking more into that, and I found out that other people, had seen it in, I think, Texas or something. And, I didn't think too much about it until my teen brought it back up to me again and said a few weeks ago and asked me once again, can you describe what it is that you saw? And then I went on the internet because I was like, let me find something, a drawing or something that I could show, because I can't draw. I have no skills in that sense. So I'm looking and I pull up your show, and that's when, I saw the creature and I said, here it is. This is it.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that moment must have been like for you when you did see that photo for the first time. Couldn't have been easy.
No, but it stopped my team from asking me to keep describing it. So they got their answer and I got closure. So we'll say that part is good.
That's about the only good thing we can take out of this. In college, you had a folklore class professor who gave a lecture about werewolves one day. What did he have to say about them?
Well, he warned about the Hollywood werewolf and that it wasn't accurate with the actual folklore from the old world. And he explained that if you go way, way back, the folklore talks of two different types of werewolves. There's one that was a human that could change into a werewolf using the dark arts and things like that. And then there was one that was always a werewolf. It was born a werewolf to werewolf parents, and it stayed a werewolf. And there were differences as far as, one being supernatural and one just being what it was. So that was one of the things, because he went over old world creatures like that, like, vampires, and what was the difference between a vampire and a Verdalak and a Warbalaka, that type of thing. So, that was one of the differences with the werewolf that he brought up.
After all the boring college classes I sat through, I'd give my left arm to sit through a lecture on werewolves. That'd be all right.
Well, it was a seminar. There were only a few of us in the class, so, we had that leisure to hear about these types of things, and it was eye-opening. I've never been big on werewolf movies. Just never cared for them, really. And it was even before I saw this creature. So when we went over it in class, it was kind of an eye-opener to see that America had kind of sanitized the creature. And I do remember also he said that it was an allergic reaction to silver, but that the silver alone wouldn't kill it. Wolfbane had to be in the air also. So the pollen from the wolfbane, it was a combination of the silver and the pollen, and it was an allergic reaction.
I still say there had to be something to sit through a lecture like that. That's all right.
It was, until we had to go and do our research, and, that really meant going down. I remember going and having to pull out books that were written, like, in German or, Old German and things like that, and trying to go through these old languages, Old French, and translate them so that, you had your documentation for where you were going and with it, and to support what you were trying to say. And it was always in the darkest recesses of the library that we had to go, and that wasn't fun.
Yeah, that part of it might not have been fun, but sitting there listening to him talk about it, that would be.
Yeah, it was. I have to admit it was.
Yeah, that must have been. A few weeks after you had your encounter, you had another interesting experience. What happened that day?
Well, it was probably just before the Memorial Day holiday, and I always loved to hike. And I guess because even now I sit there and say, well, why was I hiking after having seen this creature? But I think because I saw it in the city, and I have pretty much said it has to be something from that area. I didn't think it would be out in the woods. And like I said, I had never heard about any of this. So, I didn't know that their preferred habitation was wooded areas. So I went hiking with a friend, and we made it to our destination, which was a pond in this wooded area of the city. And when we got there was a couple sitting on the other side of the pond having a picnic. It was an older man and an older woman. They weren't senior citizens, but they were older than us. When you're that young, everyone's old, I guess. So I would say they were in their maybe late 20s or 30s. They were sitting there on a blanket. Their car was maybe 10 or so feet behind them, and we come off the trail. We're standing near the pond, and the pond has these beautiful orange goldfish in them. Well, they weren't goldfish, but they're the carp, the brilliant orange carp. And it was surrounded by, I believe they're pines, and, it was just nice to reach the destination after the hike. And I was looking in one direction, and this friend was looking in another direction. And the next thing that I hear is, "Oh my God, what is that?" And, she said really, really loudly. And this individual had been complaining a lot. I'm hot, there are too many bugs. So I just figured it was another complaint about the outdoors. And I said, what? What's what? And, this person points to some trees not too far away and said, that thing that just walked behind the tree, that huge Bigfoot-like thing. And I said, Bigfoot, here? And, I said something like that. And I do know I didn't see anything. I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, maybe you saw something else. And this individual goes, oh, yeah? Well, then why are they leaving? And I looked over and the couple, they were throwing their things into the car and they made a quick getaway. They jumped in the car after they threw everything in and they drove away. And this person said that woman over there saw it too. And they assured me that the woman pointed to it and that the man looked and that was when he saw it. And then, they got out of there. So we did leave. I didn't see it, but I figured something had to be up because they were leaving. So, I just didn't think we should stay. So I finally, said, yeah, let's go. So we went. We didn't go out the way we came because we came through the wooded parts. We went out the gated area and walked through the residential area to get back home. So that was the next incident. I didn't see it, but it was described to me as a Bigfoot Sasquatch-like creature.
Wow, sounds like it left quite the impression on her.
Yeah, I think it did. And, I think all the way home it was, don't you believe me? And I believed something was there because that couple left. And that's what made me think, okay, there's something to it. I don't know what it was, but there was something.
Did she ever mention any distinguishing features that she noticed to you, such as ears?
No, just that it was hairy. It was real hairy, really tall, and really big. I think those are the three adjectives used to describe it. Hairy, tall, and big.
Yeah, sounds like it must have been a Sasquatch then. That's what it sounds like to me. Did you ever tell your daughters that monsters weren't real when they were small?
No, what I did say was, that monsters aren't always these ugly creatures that look frightening to us, that sometimes they have a face that looks just like ours, can even look kind, because what makes something a monster is what's inside the heart. So I always explain that as far as the supernatural aspects of a monster, we used to watch something called Martin's Mystery, which was a Canadian cartoon, and teenagers, Martin Mystery and his stepsisters, and they would go and they would solve these mysteries, and usually they had to do with monsters and stuff. So, they saw that type of monster, but I didn't really discuss that with them. I did watch it with them so that I could explain if they were scared or whatever, but they did see that. But I always taught them that there were animals out there that we did not know everything that there was to know about, and that there were some animals that science would even say they were rather dubious to the scientific community, and they wouldn't affirm that these creatures existed. So that was, of course, the cryptids, and, they knew about the Yeti, Sasquatch, and Loch Ness, and Champ, and that type of thing. So, they knew about the cryptids, but, I did say that there are probably more in other countries that we don't know much about. And I would explain about the mountain gorilla, and I believe it's the Rwanda and Congo, and how for years the native people would say, oh yeah, there's the man of the mountain, and he'll kill you, and things like that, and that the European explorers and colonists didn't believe them, and then one day, there it is. And I always made it clear that this was always a possibility because we're always finding new species of plant, new species of starfish, things like that. And I've, always said that this is probably what some of these cryptids are. They're just a species that we still have to learn about, and the scientific community has to finally say, okay, they exist. So that's how that whole thing played out with us. Is the Dogman a creature, or is it a supernatural being? For me, I don't see animals as being monsters. So if it's an animal, I just say it's an animal, it's a creature. I could never label it as a monster. Same thing with Sasquatch. Even though they could be dangerous and they can cause a lot of fatalities, if they're just an animal, I just refer to them as creatures. So I never wanted to build that fear or teach that to my children, that because it's different, we call it a monster. I never wanted to do that. So I tried very hard not to, simply because of my line of work. We go to a lot of different places and we see a lot of different things, and I wanted them to have their wits about them and say, okay, that's just another animal, that's just another creature. We're looking at a type of jellyfish that is really strange. It doesn't look like the kind we see on Bikini Bottom and SpongeBob, but it's not a monster. It's just an animal that looks different from what we're used to seeing. So that's just me. I know people will say Sasquatch is a monster, and I think it's an animal, it's a primate. And so I know I'm babbling on, but so the monster thing, what I saw was very scary. It was terrifying. If one day we find out that it is an animal, then I'll say, phew, thank goodness I didn't label it a monster. But if they come out and say, well, it's something else, then I'll be, up a creek because I withheld calling it a monster.
Speaking of the what are they side to this, you've got some opinions on the origins of dogmen and what they are. Please share those with us.
Well, I just know certain paleontologists do say that, when they look at the fossil evidence of the dire wolf, that the way that the pelvic plates are in the bones, they believe that it could be bipedal. And, it makes me wonder if this is maybe a type of dire wolf. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying I do wonder, and I think it's a possibility that we can't just push to the side. So I'm thinking that that's what it is. It's a type of dire wolf, maybe a subspecies of it that escaped extinction, and it's still alive and kicking and scaring the wits out of certain people like me. And I think that part of the adaptation is where if it's losing its habitat, it's learning to adapt to the cities, and feeding off of garbage is one way that a lot of animals adapt to the loss of habitat. We see turkeys, because I know where I am, and I'm in the city. We have turkeys, and the population is making a comeback. And rats adapted to humans a long, long, long time ago, and they're very good scavengers, eating off of human garbage. So yeah, maybe I'm being naive, and I'm trying not to scare myself, because I have read some of the comments on your shows, and people are saying they're supernatural, but I think that we should look at it from all angles before we hone in on one thing and one thing only. So science has possibilities out there, and I guess the spiritual side has possibilities too. So I'm not going to rule either out, but I think I'm going to go with the science and say that, to me, it sounds like a dire wolf. I'm just thinking that the creature is probably an opportunistic creature, like hyena. Hyenas are more scavengers than they are predators, but if they need to, they can hunt, and they will kill. Even turkey vultures and vultures, they scavenge the majority of the time. They prefer that, but they will hunt small prey like rodents and frogs and so on. and they will eat those things if they have to. I think any animal will defend itself, and I think that these animals are more than capable of defending themselves. And I do think that if humans ever got on the wrong side of these creatures, that they would. I just think that that's the way nature is. Nature is a very bloody and vicious thing as well as beautiful. So these creatures can be bloody and vicious, and hunger makes a lot of creatures killing machines. So I just think that there's so much to learn and so much to know about these creatures before we draw any definitive conclusion about what they are.
It's funny that you say that, because it sure does seem like the more you find out about them, the more you find out you just don't know.
Exactly. And I think that's probably why they should be labeled under cryptid, because, we don't know. We didn't know much about primates until certain scientists like Jane Goodall went and actually immersed herself in the population and won their confidence and studied them and actually documented things about them. But I don't know if these creatures will ever allow a human to get that close. And I don't know if a human should want to get that close. So some things I think we're going to have to allow to remain a mystery. This probably is one of those. And then others, maybe one day we'll find a way to study them that doesn't cause harm to either side. So, I'm hopeful, I guess, because I know if anyone was to study them and they said to me, come on along, I would be like, no, that's really, I'll stay over here and allow them to stay over there, and we can be happy.
Yeah, trying to get close to them doesn't sound like a good idea to me, at all. You just said you're trying not to scare yourself. When you're walking in dark areas at night now, how often do thoughts of dogmen enter your mind?
Well, after seeing your picture and after hearing, I haven't listened to a large number of your broadcasts. I've only had the chance to listen to a few. And then once you told me about them being in Central Park in the New York City area, I think I'm a little more cautious, and I listen a lot more to what my dog is saying when I walk her. And now my feeling is, okay, so my incident wasn't an isolated incident, so that means there are more of these creatures. After listening to some of your guests, I do think the population is on the upswing. Maybe at some point there was a decline, but I think now it's on the upswing, simply because there seem to be so many encounters in North America in so many varied places. So I don't believe that's just a small group of creatures running around North America, migrating or things like that. I think these are probably settled populations, and they're just growing in number.
They sure seem to be. Do you still enjoy the wilderness now as much as you used to before you had that encounter?
As time went on, because I saw it in the city, like I said, and I had no knowledge of these things, I didn't really equate them with the wilderness, and for a long time I never thought that there was even a Sasquatch or Bigfoot in New York. And it wasn't maybe until not long before I saw Dogman that I saw that there was a Sasquatch in New York. People had been seeing it, and in a location that I also frequent. And I was like, gosh. I was just like, wow. But I'll just be extra careful. Like I said, I've had run-in with a bear, but I don't think I can stop living because I did see this creature in the city. I feel like if I'm going to fear the wilderness, then I'm going to have to fear the city too. And I can't stay inside. That's not a way to live. So I'll enjoy maybe less frequent visits to the wilderness areas, but I'll still go to more populated areas so that if I'm ever screaming for help, hopefully people can come. But also with the city, I'll just be a little more wary also. And I think that's the best that I can do. I don't want to live in fear, and, I don't know how much longer I have on Earth, and I don't want to spend it. I want to live it to the full, but with caution. I think that's the best way to say.
I like your outlook on life and all of this. I'm impressed.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope I've made sense of it because, it's hard to make sense of something that maybe defies logic. But like I said, I do believe that there are things out there that we don't know about. I do believe that a lot of folk tales are based in reality. And I don't think it's wise to discount something simply because it's a folk tale or a legend or even a myth, because I don't believe someone sat there and just made all of these things up. Maybe some things, because, it's quite common for people to make up stories to gain power over people. You create these fearful creatures or fearful people, and you can gain power over people. But I don't think that that's the case with everything. I do believe that some of it is based in reality, and we just have not found the evidence yet. So that's just my thinking with a lot of these types of things.
Well, like you, in a lot of cases, I do believe that where there is smoke, there's fire. So I think you're right with what you said.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. We're in agreement there.
It sure sounds like it. Well, Mary, it's about time for us to get out of here. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Other than I think that it's wise to give this creature a wide berth and, to respect the fact that it is most likely a wild animal. And I tell people all the time, wild animals, they're wild, and you just don't know what they will do. So it's best to respect them and give them their space. And, I read some of the comments and people wanted to see the creature, and I just can only tell you, I don't think you do. So don't look for it. Don't take a chance. It's obviously got the equipment necessary to do harm, and you don't want to see if it will do harm. So that would be my words of advice and wisdom to someone out there. Just leave it alone.
Well, that's well said. Yeah, be careful what you wish for. Thank you so much for your time, Mary. Thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about those experiences. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for letting me get it off my chest. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Have a great night.
Thanks, and you do the same.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.